Hi, this is Ginny, and I'm here with my colleague Vivek. Between the two of us, we have about 30 years of experience of leadership coaching in India. And this is a podcast about the practice of leadership coaching in India. Vivek and I have been friends and colleagues for some time. And between the two of us, there has been a commitment to contribute in our own way to how the profession of coaching is developing in India. And there has been a sense that whilst there are a lot of theoretical models, a lot of training schools related to the profession of coaching, perhaps the conversation about the lived experience of coaching, the conversation about the applied aspects of coaching, the conversation about the practice of coaching could do with a little more volume. And this is Vivek and I attempting to do that. You can find out more about us in a short video called About Us, in which we've talked about our career trajectories and who we are and why we are doing this. In this episode, our broad theme is to look at the movement from theory to practice. And the specific theme within this movement is to look at how we shape our relationship to the models, approaches, theories, techniques that we've been trained in. And what is that arc of the development? What is that arc of the journey of a coach from what we've been trained in and to how we then live it, how we then practice it, how we then apply it? Vivek and I speak in this episode about that arc of development, that arc of that journey, and what it could entail, what elements it could have. On that note, Vivek, I'm going to invite you to come in and speak a little bit more about our topic today.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. And once again, welcome to our audience. And in welcoming, let me also qualify that this particular episode that Ginny and I are doing, this one is aimed more for our peers in the coaching community, practitioners of coaching. And of course, everyone is welcome to have a listen. But like I said, it's aimed at the coaching community. There is an arc of learning in our evolution as coaches, as Ginny was saying. And she and I have had multiple conversations in preparation for this episode. And through those conversations, what we were reckoning with is that yes, as a start, we found ourselves apprenticing to what can be termed as schooled knowledge. You go to some academy, you go to some school, you learn about models and methods from established practitioners, and that's a wonderful way to apprentice. I almost remember that in my starting stage as a coach, it seemed like my life depended on having those models accessible in my head. Otherwise, I'd feel stranded. I wouldn't know how to go about my work. And yes, as the arc evolves, patterns change, approaches change, and we have been reflecting on how to name that change.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we are bringing to you as audience today is what we've found out in that naming of that change. Another way to to articulate this same proposition is that is to look at the contrast between received wisdom and earned wisdom. So received wisdom can be understood as what we inherit from from schools, from established practices, from books, from existing knowledge. And like I've said, the, that is precious, especially as a beginner coach. Earned wisdom is who we find ourselves to be as a coach, as a practitioner, while in the practice of coaching. Something uniquely emerges in who we practice as, who I practice as, and there is something precious about that also.
Yeah.
So we'll comment on this contrasting of received and earned wisdom also as we go through this episode. Anjani, anything you'll add to qualify all of that?
Yeah, Vivek, as I was listening to you, I could see what you're terming as received wisdom and our earned wisdom. Two things popped up in my head. One was that if we don't pay attention, we could miss out on the earned wisdom because we place so much importance on the received wisdom. And so this conversation is about saying, let's pay attention to that, the practice as well.
Yeah.
And so otherwise, the earned wisdom can probably be more unconscious, and if we don't pay that attention. And as I was listening to receive wisdom and the earned wisdom, I was comparing it to a ground that we were birthed in through our training, our education, and then the ground that we find on our own.
Yes.
That's the arc of the journey. So in some ways, to me, we're looking at how do we find our own ground as coaches. The initial foundation was provided by our training, but as we practice more and more, how do we find our own ground in coaching?
Yeah. All right. So with that introduction, what we've arrived at in our naming of the change in that arc of learning, essentially, if we apply first principles thinking, what happens in any coaching engagement and any coaching assignment is that the coach is essentially attempting two things. One is that the coach is getting a sense of who the client is as a human being. And two, the coach is attempting to get a sense of what developmental change can serve this human being.
Yeah.
So we've taken those two core aspects of what happens in any coaching assignment and come up with two sensibilities, which are earned. And they lead to finding one's own ground.
Yeah.
So the first one is what we're calling particularity. And particularity is linked to getting a sense of who the client is as a human being. So let's have a chat about that, and then we can talk about the second one shortly thereafter. Okay, so do you need anything to add, or should I dive into particularity right away?
No, I just think that I could just repeat back in my words what you've said, which is very, I think, foundational. And how we've taken away all the labels and get to the first principles of what we're really doing as coaches. What we are doing, one is to figuring out who is my client as a human being. And we have various tools, approaches, psychometrics that are dedicated to just that entire enterprise of figuring out who is my client, who is this human being. And the second thing we're doing is to be grappling with understanding, making sense of what change makes sense here. And then we have a multitude of theories, models, approaches, tools, techniques that speak to that aspect of coaching. But essentially, coaching is these two pieces. Who is my client? What change makes sense for this client? And the sensibility of particularity speaks to the first of these, which is who is my client?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. So particularity, a way to start understanding what we're implying by that is to um, become cognizant that coaching, as it's practiced, is a one-on-one profession. There's a coach and there's a client, and there is something that uniquely happens between the two of them.
Mm.
Also, to go into finer nuances, um, who we become greatly depends on the presence of the person where we are with.
Mm.
Our presence gets impacted by who we are with. So, for example, when I interact with Ginny, I'm a certain kind of person. When I'm being with others in my life, there's something which shifts, something which doesn't quite show up in the same way. It shows up in a different way. There's something unique which shows up in any particular one-on-one conversation, and coaching is like that. So particularity is about noticing what is uniquely happening in that conversation. So that's one beginning way of understanding it. Ginny, how will you add to this?
Yeah, I think what we are trying to really expose, bring out is just this movement in our particularly in the human development field, the movement from neat categories to the movement of relational dynamics. Some of the received wisdom, like psychometrics and, the way of understanding another person, talks about almost, putting them in a category. And that's a useful way of understanding somebody. You put them in a category. They are introvert, they're extrovert, they are, so and so on this continuum, they are so and so on this person. But as we've practiced, there is a sense that who I am and who this person is in a unique dynamic here. And who I am is being influenced by who this person is, and who this person is and how they are showing up is being influenced by my presence. Vivek, it's the classic uncertainty principle in sciences, that the observer makes a difference to the phenomena being observed,
Yes.
What we are saying really here is that we need to have that deepened sensibility that my presence and my coach's presence is creating a unique dynamic here. And my presence affects the way my coachee shows up, and my coachee's presence affects the way I show up. And therefore, almost sort of unshackle ourselves from these categorical ways of relating to people and move more into this relational dynamic, which is which has a life of its own.
Yeah. Right. So what I remember, and maybe I still do it somewhat. I was very under the influence of the Enneagram, much more earlier than now. So and my approach would be to immediately try and in my head categorize which type of the Enneagram my client fits in. And in this attempting to fit in, I think I would lose track of what is uniquely and particularly happening in that very conversation. And I think what we're saying is that there is a great deal of wisdom and richness in staying attentive to the particularity as opposed to trying to fit categories which are pre-existing.
Yeah.
So that's one way to understand it. Also, I think another way to understand it is that no two coaches coach in the same way. So if let's say, Ginny, you and I work with the same client separately, there'll be different outcomes, different conversations which happen.
Yeah.
And that's because of what we bring as the person, as the coach we are, and how our presence impacts which way the conversation navigates.
Yeah.
And there's a particularity to that also.
Yeah.
So over the years, through the arc of learning, what we've realized is that noticing what is it about my presence as a coach that creates something particular which is valuable is the thing to be more attentive to.
Yeah. I think, Vivek, there are sort of, in the interest of clarity, we could say that there are three dimensions to particularity: the coach and the particularity of the coach, the coachee and the particularity of the coachee, and the coach-coachee relationship and the particularity of that relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
And so attending and being fully present to the assignment of coaching requires having our sensibilities attuned to all these three dimensions. What's really happening with me when I'm with this person? What's really happening with this person when this person's with me? And what's really happening in this relationship as we both engage in a conversation together?
Right. Very well said. So, that captures the elements of how particularity gets impacted. So let's also, try and attempt to say, what is it, what is looking for particularity like? How do we go about that? So it isn't about any pre-named, pre-existing thing. So it's not like you're looking for a particular phrase the client says, or a particular emotion, or a certain way of saying things or not saying things. So it isn't any of that. But I think it's more about being in the process of knowing that attending to particularity matters, and hence seeing what that reveals. So that thing, sort of basic foundational step, is to be very cognizant that something unique, special, particular is coming to life in this dialogue, in this conversation. And as a coach, I have to be super sensitive to picking that up. So that's I think a foundational step. Over and above that, I think how one can attempt to notice particularity is, so with any client, people have their issues and tensions, and they usually come with that to coaching, to try and find some way to resolve and move ahead in life. And let's use the term: there's a primary tension. Primary tension is, in the coach's assessment, what is it about the client's life that holds primary and significant place as the tension in their life? And again, this to a great deal depends on that that coach's way of looking at things. And it also, depends on what the coach's presence evokes. All three elements of what you earlier listed. So it is noticing that primary tension and then behaviors or languaging around that primary tension.
Mm. Mm.
So I've said a bunch of things, but why don't you, in your way, highlight what is necessary?
Yeah, I mean, Vivek, I was just sort of struck by it's something emerging in me as I was listening to you, and it was that in our conversation, remaining true to the task of what we are attempting to do through this conversation, which is to speak to the applied aspect of coaching. I think what's emerging is that we are creating a repository of good questions to take into an assignment, as opposed to the received wisdom, which is a lot of theory, a lot of knowledge, a lot of, and we need that. That's the foundation. It needs to be built on that. It's kind of like the scaffolding, right? But at some point, the scaffolding needs to be taken off, and a structure needs to stand on its own. And I think these questions, that what is the primary tension around which this issue is organized for the client, is a very powerful and potent question to step into the particularity of this particular coaching assignment.
Yeah. Yeah, scaffolding is a good term, right? But now that you've named it that way, at least in the starting years, I would rely on the scaffolding of what had been schooled in for me, and there have been several coaching assignments where things did not work out.
Mm.
Did not work out means that for a variety of reasons, it wasn't a satisfactory assignment.
Mm.
And it had me question, I would tell myself, I'm doing what I've learned, I'm getting better at applying that what is it? What's not working out? And it almost felt like, the ground below me is collapsing.
Mm.
Like I wasn't any longer sure of it. So it wasn't about getting better at what I thought should be done, but I started questioning, should I even be doing what I'm doing?
Mm.
Without knowing what else should I be doing? That kind of, just loss of any solid foundation to stand on.
Mm.
It's not like every assignment was like, otherwise, I wouldn't be where I am right now. But there were definite such moments.
Yes, for
And
all
it's useful to, be reflective and, have a certain healthy self-critique around these.
Mm.
And through much of that reflection, these strands of what we're saying now started becoming evident.
Mm.
That it's important for us as an individual coach to notice what our presence evokes.
Mm.
To be very sensitive to what is uniquely showing up.
Mm.
And to notice this, especially around the primary tension.
Mm.
Then to make meaning of that, which gives us some more solid ground to stand on.
Yeah.
How's been your experience around these things?
I resonate with that, Vivek, completely. And what was immediately striking for me was that sentence, that I was trying to get better at what I've been taught, and just getting better at, let's say I've been taught A, B, C, D. Your experience that just being better at A, better at B, better at C, better at D wasn't necessarily increasing the sense that what I was doing was satisfactory for me or for my client. And there were questions all around it. And so what you're speaking to is that whatever may be that received wisdom, at some point in our trajectory, we reach a place where we question that. And one, that is absolutely normal. And two, that is actually a sign of growth and development, where you start to question the stuff that we've been trained in and start to then use that experience and reflection to say, hey, let me put that in the background. Let me put that away. Let me see what's really happening here in the moment here with this client. And that to me speaks of that arc of development from received wisdom to earned wisdom. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah. And these things happen over time, and time can be several years also. So um, those of our listeners who are at a more initial stage of their growth as a practitioner, I guess what we can point out to them is that it's important to make a start in noticing what is particular, and also what your presence leads to in that, in noticing that particularity.
Yeah.
So it happens over time, and also I think also we've said this multiple times, but to just say it again, all such existing models and methods are tremendously useful, and they're about a pattern. Whereas what we're saying, there are patterns and then there is particularity. There's both. Let us not discard one for the other.
Yeah. And that is development, Vivek, right? When we hold the complexity of, the shared aspect of humanity, which our models and theories and tools and techniques speak to. They somehow captured what is a shared aspect of our humanity, how we are all essentially the same. But particularity also then honors the unique aspect of being human. Every human being is really unique, with literally a unique thumbprint. So, and I think that arc of development is, can we hold both? And that takes practice, and it's confronting and it's challenging. But worth attempting.
Yeah. I think it's probably much more worth than enrolling in multiple short or long-term workshops and courses and this and that. I mean, it's not like we're saying those aren't valuable. I think it's useful to get a diversity of thought and incorporate as many ideas one can collect. But it's very important to apply and critique over and over, and see what works in your individual way of showing up as a coach.
Yeah. And I think from our own experience, Vivek, at least from my own experience, where early days I was, early years, I was really, in such a strong sense of that despite knowing what I know, despite reading 1,000 books on this, when I am in the coaching space, there is a sense I don't know what I'm doing here. And it is from that place that one would say, okay, what is that next course I can do? Maybe I can do a course on how to ask beautiful aha moment generating questions. Maybe I can do a course on, how to increase my presence as a coach. Maybe I can do a course on, family constellation, a course on Enneagram, a course on, various theories and approaches. But it just felt like if I could do something more. And like you said, it's useful to do it. It promotes diversity of thought. It allows us to bring a multi-dimensional and an integrated approach to our coaching practice. There's definitely value in that. But it's useful to ask ourselves, what am I undertaking these courses out of? Is it
Yeah.
from a sense of dearth, a sense of inadequacy, a sense of I don't know enough? Or is it from being propelled from a sense of curiosity? The curiosity that I could, uh, sharpen my sensibilities. And that,
And from a sense of finding one's own ground.
and from a sense of
Yeah.
finding one's own ground. Beautifully said, Vivek. Yeah.
Okay. Shall we go on to our second point about developmental worldview?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to remind that this is the second point in understanding what are we essentially doing in coaching. We had identified 2 points: who the client is and what change is possible. And so this second point that we are attempting to talk about speaks to that aspect about what change is possible. Vic, take it away.
Yeah. So again, we'll say this in a few different ways, but a starting statement can be that developmental worldview is essentially our philosophical belief system as a coach that impacts what we end up doing in our coaching. It is the undertone and the intellectual foundation of everything that is being attempted. So what is being attempted? I guess from a developmental perspective, as a coach, the coach is trying to one name what change will make sense, and two, um, how to go ahead and bring about that change. Responses to both those questions arrive from our developmental worldview.
Yeah.
So that's one way to start. How would you add to that, Jim?
All I'd say, Vivek, is that I'm sure the people listening to this conversation would understand developmental worldview. It would be one of the primary sort of concepts we learn as part of our training and practice as coaches. But I think what's important to highlight here is in the questions of what change makes sense here and how that change will happen, we are creating a path to accessing our development worldview.
Yeah.
That's because what is development worldview, we all understand. How to unearth our own development worldview, which is going to have such an impact on any coaching assignment. The development worldview we carry is going to, influence, imbue, affect everything that happens in a coaching conversation.
Right.
And how do we get to that development worldview? Is by looking at these 2 questions of what change makes sense here, given the particularity here, given what we are noticing, given what we are observing, what change makes sense here, and how that change will happen. So I think those 2 questions are an access to uncovering our development worldview.
Yeah, that's a very important distinction, because this uncovering is not easy. I think what we are realizing more and more is that the uncovering happens mostly in our attempted application of these 2 points.
Yeah.
We may have some idea which could be either untested or unconscious or unarticulated or poorly articulated, or in just messy random thoughts which show up once in a while. So and that's all valid. That's how we start.
Yeah.
And just over time, by applying ourselves to the practice of coaching, our developmental worldview reveals itself more to us.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is what we're acting out of. So unless we act, we won't see it. Right.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So why are we talking about this? We're talking about this because there's a great deal of ignorance and delusion, to use those fancy labels, but those are relevant labels here. There's a great deal of delusion and ignorance around, what we think our developmental worldview might be. And because it impacts pretty much, the entire flow of the coaching, we're concluding that, it's a very important sensibility to be more attentive to.
Yeah.
So just as an example, I think, again, like we talked about in particularity about the ground collapsing and then we finding our own ground. What our experience with developmental worldview has been that has been that I think coaching, at least the way it was understood a decade or so ago, or the way it gets cool, is that it the cherished belief, that it makes things possible. That you can be so much more, and so much more can be in your life, and you can get this and that, and joy and blissfulness and success, and just the whole trailload of goodies. But what's happened over practicing, at least for us in our conversations, is that we've both realized that, let's say there's a continuum. On one end, let's say it's the world of possibility, and at the other end of the continuum is the world of limits. And both these are very valid endpoints.
Yeah.
And I think we started out believing that the world of possibility is not just more attractive, but also what must be attempted and can be attempted.
Yeah.
Whereas we've more and more realized that the world of limits is just as real, perhaps even more real, and must be honored. Um, Limits are there because the world is the way it is. And it is a delusion, or it is ignorance on our part to not pay attention to that end of the continuum.
Yeah.
And this is one, very, I think, relevant example of developmental worldview, which we coach out of.
Yeah. I think, Vivek, just remaining, true to identifying first principles. I think in the way you've articulated this continuum, the world of possibilities and the world of limits, I think this continuum is very versatile in the sense of, Simon Weston is a coach in the UK, quite venerated, and he talks about the wounded self, which is the world of limits, and the celebrated self, which is the world of possibilities. And if we take any development worldview, we could perhaps use this broad continuum to locate ourselves. And you'd use the word self-delusion, and I think part of the becoming of coach is sometimes a very painful discovery of that delusion. It can be painful when it breaks, but break it must, because what happens as part of that self-delusion is that, let's say, this idea of this beautiful, perfect life, of this unbound potential, which is limitless, and helping people realize that unbound potential that they are born with, if that's the worldview, and that's the worldview with which we start coaching, we are also recruiting our clients into that worldview. And the reality, being reality, is going to hit us and the client at some point. And
yes.
So, that it becomes critical to identify what is that development worldview that I live out of, that I practice out of? Uh, and within this broad continuum, this endless sense of possibility and this sense of limits, where do I locate myself?
Yeah. So, just to sort of make some sense of all that we're saying, I think we're saying is that there is this thing called developmental worldview, and a way to start labeling that is to understand that there are these multiple continuums,
Mm,
and world of limits, world of possibilities is one continuum.
mm,
Another one, like you said, is just the belief, that there is expansive, untapped, endless potential versus, working with what one has, perhaps, as the other end of that continuum.
yeah.
Um, Another one, just for example, is also there's just, a lot of I think coaching ideology around being yourself,
Mm, yeah.
right? That
Your authentic self, be
right.
who you
That
truly
word
are.
authentic is very fishy, I think, but yes, it gets used that way. So being yourself versus, also, that becoming some other version, different from who you are. That
Yeah.
can be the other end of that same continuum. There are
Yeah.
these multiple continuums, which all are part of developmental worldview. So I think first thing is to understand which continuums you are more actively operating out of.
Mm,
And second, very important word you've used is locating.
yeah.
Um, and locating again isn't a one-time exercise.
Mm,
Like, finding our own ground isn't a one-time exercise.
mm,
Um, there are times when being on the side of world possibilities is where we locate ourselves. Another time we locate ourselves on the side of limits.
yeah.
So, in any coaching assignment, to be very attentive to which of such continuums are playing out in that coaching assignment. And
Yes.
then where do we locate ourselves on each of those continuums? I think
Yeah.
that's the work to be done.
Yes.
Yeah.
The way I put the same thing, Vivek, is that to continue to ask ourselves, what are my assumptions here?
Hmm.
What are some of my assumptions here about what change is possible and how that change will happen? And in every coaching assignment, asking that question will, through trial and error, will reveal those fundamental assumptions that you're basing that coaching assignment on.
Yeah, and it's more through errors. Let's just say
Yeah,
that also,
it's true.
because many of these models, I think, like we said, again, they're very useful, but there's a confirmation bias within that. The
Yeah,
models are based on a certain philosophy, which works in certain contexts and settings, but not all the time.
yeah, absolutely. And I think what's important to recognize is not that the place where I'm standing on whatever continuum I use to locate myself is somehow wrong.
Hmm.
That's not what is being said here.
Right.
Locating oneself allows us to see that if I am at this point, if this is how I perceive development to be, then what opens up as a result of that, but what also closes as a result of holding that view or
Yeah.
holding that orientation. That will give us a sense of the ground that we are operating on. It'll give us the sense of almost like a map of what is going to be possible from holding this development worldview and what is not going to be possible. What's going to open up, but what are the doors that will get closed?
Yeah.
And to stay with it. And then as you experiment, you'll realize, I no longer want to locate myself here. I actually see myself moving more towards this side or more towards that side or any other way that one answers the questions of what change is possible and how that change is possible. The important point I think we are both trying to make here is to locate oneself and know the implications of locating yourself on that point.
Absolutely, yeah. Very well summarized. Okay, I guess we've sufficiently, articulated these two sensibilities of particularity and developmental worldview. So, having said all this, shall we conclude? Yeah.
We could conclude, Vivek. I could just offer a quick summary of the flow of the conversation we've been having.
Okay.
And then we could look at concluding with the final synthesis.
Yeah.
So, in summary, I think what we'd say is that Vivek and I are having this conversation out of our commitment to contribute to the profession of coaching in India and its development and its applied aspects and its practiced aspects. And with that commitment, we've been having a conversation about what is that arc of development that we could institute, that we could architect from having received our models, our theories, our approaches through our training, and to where we can take that arc of development, which is our earned wisdom, which is the ground we create for ourselves. And in this arc of development, we identified two sensibilities of a coach. The sensibility of particularity, where we look at, what is particular here, and what is particular about me here, what is particular about the coachee here, what is particular about the coaching dynamic here, the relational dynamic here. And then the second sensibility is to locate yourself in how you look at change, what change makes sense, how that will change, that change will happen, which is essentially our development worldview, to be able to really be attuned to our development worldview. And in being attuned to that development worldview, being able to understand what are the implications of that, of holding that development worldview. So that, in essence, is what this conversation has been about.
Very well summarized.
How do you think we can conclude this, Vivek?
Well, I would say, that school knowledge and all models and methods are very useful to have. And I think I find myself referencing them in the middle of some coaching engagement between sessions, just to sort of cross-check and validate, as opposed to having that lead me in a more direct way. So that's, I guess, one way to say things. And also, I think what we're inviting our peers and ourselves also to continue attending to is our conversational presence, which directly leads to our skill in identifying something particular, and also our sense of applied philosophical understanding of humans and the way we go about our lives. Because that is the fundamental undertone of what change we attempt in any coaching assignment.
Yeah,
I think those two are very, very relevant things to continuously work on.
Yeah.
What would you add?
All I'd say is that, I think what we've attempted here is to see that to bring to life the distinction between a formulaic application of what we've learned, as opposed to a reflective application of what we've learned. And that reflection is a challenging process, a confronting process. But I think without that reflection, maturity from when we were birthed as coaches to how we practice, without that kind of self-reflection, that maturity is not going to happen. That maturity.
Yeah, we won't find our ground. Yes.
Yeah, we won't find our ground. And so, yeah, that to me, I think, is the essence of what we've shared. I hope everybody's enjoyed this conversation. Anybody listening to us has enjoyed this conversation, has found it useful. And thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you. And if you have comments or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. And you can get in touch with us at the email leadershipcoachingindia@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you.